I mean, you'll hear the language of this. I don't want to be, a party pooper, but you'll hear all the language of this when we get to King Charles's coronation, of course.
Mhm. Yes. So, there was another thing that you mentioned about how when the power goes when the power is handed down, a lot of times individuals think that things have shifted, but those behind the scenes kind of are still ruling it in many cases. And a great example is the corporate interests that are happening now are basically fueling both sides. Look at World War II, there was the same bankers fueling both sides as well. It was the same interests were really being pushed forward. And that reminded me of a lot of stories in ancient scriptures and Greek scriptures and Egyptian texts that the old gods were taken over by the new gods, right? And the old pantheon, but there was a new pantheon. So what's your take on that? Do you think that was a mirror story of like because the people in power basically by saying there's a whole new pantheon of gods make it look like there's a new world with new possibilities, but it obviously seems like the control has actually gone down through the century since then.
That's a really good insight, Neil. And to be honest, I hadn't really thought about that. I hadn't thought about the new pantheon in those terms. I think you're probably right. I had previously thought of it more in terms of assimilating old story to new story, in kind of in the way that happened when the missionaries went to England and they built the churches on the sites of Druidic temples, that sort of thing. So you can just put a spin on the old patterns of tribute and adoration, so on and so forth. And I think there was a bit of that done, certainly in the Roman Empire, where there were established patterns of worship and protocols that needed to be given a new appearance, maybe even a Christian appearance, but there were actually still the old religion. I mean, I saw that for myself in Brazil, for instance, when I was there in the 1980s, where you saw what looked like the new pantheon, to use that language, where you've got the figurine of Mary and the figurine of Jesus and the figurine of Saint George. But what you don't realize is that it's actually the old religion and the old rituals that are being used, and they've simply put new faces and new names on the entities, but it's really still the old entities and their stories that are being invoked. So I think perhaps with the Roman pantheon, that something of that was happening. And I do think there was an attempt to continue old knowledge and old patterns, particularly for the elites, while giving the appearance that everything had gone over to Christianity.
Yes, and that's what I was going to ask you next. Do you think the Vatican Church is that in some ways?
Well, it's full of symbology that would suggest that. I'll just leave it at that.
Right. I mean, and they did take a lot of structures from Egypt and put it in their basement or whatever. But they actually took a lot of things from the pagan world, if you will, and put it in places of high importance in the world, ley lines.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And there would be esoteric groups, secret societies that would understand all that symbology and that would look at objects that are out there in St. Peter's Square, for instance, and say, I know what that is, I know what that means. But the great mass of the public don't.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a question here from Jennifer. All right, here we go. I've heard this question a few times, so I'm curious your take on it. Are people who have Rh negative blood type descendants of giants talked about in Genesis called the Nephilim? So any info on that?
I get asked that a lot, and I don't have any information on it. It's a really interesting question. The fact that humanity is two breeding groups, that's just very strange, and there has to be an explanation for that. And also cultural differences are really intriguing. Where do those come from? The spectrum of human appearance, where does that come from? I get asked these questions a lot And I'm asked, is there anything in the ancestral narratives that speaks to those questions? And at this point, I just have to say there may be, but I haven't found it at this point in my research journey. So you'll have to ask me again in another 12 months.
Mhm. All right, we have a question here from Regina. The Egyptian sun gods predate Yahweh. Dendera intimates that they came from Sirius. This group successfully kept a tight rein on the population through their religious ritual for millennia. It does seem that the Egyptian gods and those of Sumeria were likely the same. In many ways, the Egyptians established the pattern for all other civilizations. Would you agree with that?
I think the patterns were older than that. The Sirius connection and the Sirius connection with the Yahweh character is really intriguing, because all the stories I hear of people like Asherah from the Pleiades are positive and nurturing. Sirius, there are nurturing stories that we can hear from Mali, West Africa. But it is a different place. It's a different region of space. And I noticed when I was doing the research for Escaping from Eden that the oldest book in the Bible, or what many scholars think is the oldest book in the Bible, the book of Job, identifies 3 regions of space exercising power dynamics over what happens on planet Earth. And one is the Pleiades, and one is Orion, and one is Sirius.
Yeah.
So what I've just heard makes some kind of sense, that the Yahweh character might be from somewhere quite different to the Pleiades, thank you very much. And if I were to hazard a guess as to where, it would be either Sirius or Orion. Although Orion, the stories are probably a little bit more ambiguous than Sirius and the Pleiades. Orion seems to be associated more with control we can do absolutely nothing about. And Sirius, there's a bit of a blend of light and shade, and the Pleiades a bit more light in it. So I would be really interested to pursue that line of research, to be honest. I haven't plumbed those connections, so that's probably as much as I can say at this point.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Just to add to that, based on just connecting with so many presenters over the years, I have heard many stories of, you probably heard it too, the Orion Wars, right? And also the DNA wars that started in Orion. And but then fast forward to a lot of information now that happened a millennia ago, and Orion, for the most part, is a very peaceful, peaceful constellation. It's, what a lot of people are saying, Orion starseeds that claim to be from there. And but it's
Yes.
interesting because one other story I heard many times from different channelers, independent of each other, and some researchers, were that there were beings that were in Orion to escape persecution, basically disintegrated from that experience and incarnated into Earth, thinking that they will remain and will keep their memories, not realizing Earth was a place of amnesia. And then a lot of them came down to Earth with the imprint of what they did in Orion, and without even knowing about it, became a part of the elitist issue on Earth right now, instituting the same patterns. So I'm just throwing that out there because it's got similar
Yes.
storyline to what you're sharing.
Well, that's interesting, because I have heard that said about the Pleiades as well. Bearing in mind the Pleiades is a star system, so it's not a single population we're talking about.
Exactly.
We're talking probably about a spectrum of beings, some very flesh and blood like us, and some that might be quite different, interdimensional kind of entities. And there are stories told about Pleiadian civilizations that have transcended war, meaning they've gone through a time of conflict. They've done that, and they've come out the other end to an understanding of how to do harmony, and that's part of their interest in us and their concern for us. And I just mention this because those who know this will be sorry if I don't say it, but that is represented in the original Star Trek canon as well, because that's the story of Vulcan, a planet that's known terrible conflict, but they have found a way through it. They found a way of peace and logic, and that's the Spock character. who's now observing human behavior with a raised eyebrow, rather
Right.
interested in the way we conduct ourselves. And I'm told that that was really Gene Roddenberry's code for the stories of the Pleiadians having gone through warfare and come out the other
Wow.
side and are now observing us with that raised eyebrow and kind of bemused affection. And I mention that because there's a lot of esoteric information that does find its way into the Star Trek canon, just like our ancestral narratives. It's not pure fiction. There is stuff in there that is storytelling from our ancestors and also channeled information as well.
Exactly.
So that gets my attention. These stories have resonance for a reason.
Right. And the prime directive, the law of non-interference, it was also part of Star Trek.
Yes, it was. And of course, we hear that spoken about in the Book of Enoch, when it talks about this moment of hybridization that so many cultures remember. It's told as a story of a breach of a prime directive. And often Christians read it in a religious language. They say, oh, this is fallen angels. This is angels who've left their station. They're no longer obedient to God. Well, go back to the root meanings is my big thing in the Book of Enoch. And what you're actually being told is they have breached an agreement by coming to the planet's surface and creating another wave of hybridization, because there's already been hybridization by the time that happens.
Yeah.
But this was not authorized. Clearly, by this point, there's some kind of a council, a sky council up and running, as the Bible calls it, or the Galactic Federation, as Hay Mashed calls it. And there is an agreement that's been breached. And so, yes, I think that is that's a real thing. I think the policy of silence and non-disclosure by our governments through the ages is something they didn't set. I think that was set at another level, and it's this prime directive of non-disclosure, non-intervention, although the history of humanity suggests quite a bit of intervention,
Right.
and quite a bit of disclosure.
Yeah. So it's almost like, what kind of interaction? Maybe they can't just come down here and tell us something in plain sight, right? Or maybe it can be done more etherically or indirectly, and it can't just be so blatant. Like, you guys are destroying yourselves. We're landing on your field right now, letting you know that you did something wrong. We're real, right? So, what level of non-interference is the question?
Yes, that's true. And it's interesting you mentioned the "you guys are destroying yourselves" message, because that does appear, without going into too much detail, to have been part of conversations at the covert government level of contact, but it's also there in a lot of popular contact experiences as well. And I remember there was a little girl who was one of the primary school students at Rua in Zimbabwe, who had a communication experience with one of the beings in that close encounter. And she said that was what was communicated to her. They're very concerned about how we're living on the planet, how we're destroying our own planet. And it's such a beautiful planet. And similar to that, in the Virginia incident in Brazil in 1996, there were 3 girls who had eyes on with a being from a crashed craft. And when it communicated with one of the girls, there was this profound sense of sorrow. Humanity, we don't know who we are. We don't know what our potential is. We don't know that we could live so much better and in far greater harmony with ourselves, with our planet. It's a theme that recurs at that grassroots level, as well as in leaked stories from the higher ups who have contact.
Yeah. All right. So if there's no more questions for anybody in the room, please, if you do have any questions, let us know. But I have maybe 1 or 2 closing questions here. And this time I want to talk about stone circles, and how this connects to South Africa and Africa in general. Because you spoke about stone circle imagery, or stone circles being left, or just stones in general, I guess, being erected in places where paleo-contact had happened with all these different beings. Then we also see a destruction of stone circles around the world. We hear about Stonehenge, wasn't really like that at all. It was actually fragmented everywhere. That's kind of a new creation. That's some story as well. And then through Africa, right? South Africa, we have thousands of stone circles, but all the way across the West Coast is a different type of stone circle. And then we hear stories of, like, from Michael Tellinger and others, that there was an Anunnaki civilization, a colony in South Africa, and these were used as ancient gold mine operating digs or something along those lines. So just, putting all that information out there, what do you have to say about, stone structures in general, the ones in Africa? What are your thoughts about all of that?
Yeah, well, I think there are three things that we can observe if we're looking at ancient stone structures. Very close to where I live, there are stone structures that are huge boulders that have been arranged on top of one another in a structure that I would defy any natural process to create. And if it's not natural, then it's pointing to technology that we don't understand.
Mhm.
How were they lifted? Why were they done? They are the signature saying, we were here, from somebody. I don't know who, and it's very possible that my Aboriginal Australian friends in the region have an answer to that, but I've not been privy to that. So there's that kind of structure where you look and you think, what in the world and who in the world? There's a huge tower of giant boulders outside Jos in Nigeria, which is probably the most famous and the most impossible. I think the conventional story is, oh, this is all done through erosion, and there would have been other rocks and other stones around them originally, and they all got washed away when they were under the sea. Well, you don't end up with a pillar the size of the one in Jos by that method. So there's that. We were here. And then there's the stones that we erect to say they were here. And so those standing stones don't have to present in any particular shape. They are just there, clearly placed, clearly not naturally occurring, to mark those spots. And very often the local story will carry the memory of what all that is about. And so we have that in the Hebrew scriptures as well, with Jacob setting up standing stones in Bethel, where he encountered the beings coming and going from space. That's the Jacob's ladder story. And then we have built stone structures. So Stonehenge, as you say, we now think was part of something much, much larger. So we've only got more questions about Stonehenge than ever we had before. And when we go to South Africa, it's not just South Africa, but it's a number of countries in the southern cone of Africa that are straddled by these stone circular structures that don't serve any purpose we can understand. They're not large enough or solid enough to be habitations. They don't have doorways to be pens for animals, and the structure's just too big for it to be that. It serves a purpose we don't understand. Michael Tellinger and Jan Heimer have done some very interesting work around the sonic properties of those circles, and the sound energy they generate is anomalous and raises the question of technology. Is this a technology that those who built it understood that we know nothing about? Was the sound technology used as a locomotion method, for instance? I mean, when I go back to the first set of stones where you pile them up, was it sound energy that moved those blocks rather than physical energy? Because there are no scars on the blocks. Why would you need a huge grid of locomotion through southern Africa using sound energy? Well, that's when you might make the connection with prehistoric gold mining in southern Africa.
Right.
And this is the work of Michael Tellinger, well worth looking into if this piques your interest, that 200,000 years ago, when our ancestors were on the planet looking very much like you and me, but apparently not ready, not bright enough to farm or build cities, yet bright enough to work in somebody's mine, because obviously they didn't build the mines. Somebody built the mines, somebody was mining gold, our ancestors were there, There are hints of memory in the Bible and in other narratives of our ancestors being somebody else's workforce. You put all that together, and I think you've got a picture of colonization, gold mining, enslavement, and then a technology to move what's mined around Southern Africa and potentially off planet to somewhere else. That's my guess. That's nothing I can prove, but on the basis of what's been found so far, I think that's where those stone structures fit in. They are part of a technology, and that technology may be related to an industry of ancient gold mining.
Right. You know, what it was or wasn't, right? We can speculate on, we can look at ancient texts, but one thing's for sure that you spoke of, which is that it's anomalous, right? These things are vibrating in a gigahertz level that is not possible by anything natural on Earth at this point, right? That's Michael Tellinger's research.
Yes,
And
that's
so,
right. And if we went in with ears that could hear at different frequencies, the
right.
volume of that sound would be between having a vacuum cleaner in your room and having a 747 flying overhead. So it's
Mhm,
very significant
mhm.
sound energy.
Right. So, beautiful, man. Paul, I've really enjoyed this presentation and this conversation. If I feel like every time we have a conversation, we really go deeper. Really just fuels my soul speaking to you, brother, and just going deep into these topics and exploring it, because you're really piecing together our ancient past and bringing a perspective that is needed, and you're really doing the work to actually reach out to others to help inform people, so that we don't have to just be a niche group of people, but even those that are in Christianity, have the opportunity to really look at your material and do it in a way where they're not ridiculed or thought as, as wrong, but maybe just broadening the perspective on what they originally thought, so that they can come to an awareness that is more beneficial for all of humanity. So I just want to say
Definitely.
appreciate you.
Well,
Mhm.
thank you. And that's certainly my intention. Every one of my Eden books is intended as a gateway book
Yeah.
that you could give it to someone who's not read the others, and it'll be a way into these topics. Even if they're quite skeptical, there'll be enough in there to pull the reader through to the end, and for the reader to think, oh, there's something actually credible for me to give some thought to.
Mhm.
And so there's a little bit of overlap between each book, because each time I have to be aware somebody might come to this never having read any of the others, and I really want it to be like a funnel that can reach a very broad range of people who wouldn't previously have considered these topics, but who, if it's approached in the story way, in the way I do, and if I'm sharing my journey in the way I do, it makes it more palatable and easier for people to run down some of these rabbit holes and start
Mhm.
exploring a different world.
I see it. Did you know what your fourth book would be when you started your first one?
I yes, yes, I had it really at the back of my mind from escaping from Eden, that once you say there's paleo-contact in the Bible and it changes how we read the stories, it raises the obvious question, well, what was the Bible about?
Right.
Was it the book we think it is, but it's got paleo-contact in it? Or was it actually something totally different to what we think it is? And
Yeah.
so I knew at some point I'd have to circle back and take that question on, and that's what I do in the Eden series,
Mhm.
but in a way that you don't have to be that interested in religion or the Bible to read it. I mean, a lot of what I talked about was geopolitics, and a lot of what I talk about is human potential. So there are lots of different hooks that might pull a reader in and begin to see how these topics actually do join up with one another.
Right, exactly. Yeah, when you started off and you're talking about Ghana, I was like, where's he going with this one? And that's it's genius. Like, you really took us from the ancient past, deciphered the ancient text, what it could really be. Now you've gone even deeper into showing that there was actually a time where even the monotheistic religion that we hold as the idolized monotheistic religion actually had multiple priesthoods, multiple deities, and all of that stuff. And then you found a way to connect it to modern day politics and what's going on the planet, and how that there are other templates that we could follow that doesn't have to be based on this power structure that we're under right now. So Genius, brother. So thank you so
Oh,
much
thank you.
again for everything, man. And just you want to let everybody know before we close out, any closing words and where everybody can find out more about you.
Well, you can find me on The Fifth Kind on YouTube, and my other channel is just called the Paul Wallis channel. We're setting up a new website for The Fifth Kind, so come and join us there. You can find my books, Escaping from Eden, The Scars of Eden, Echoes of Eden, at Amazon, Kindle, and wherever books are sold. And my website, paulanthonywallis.com, Anthony with an H and Wallis, W-A-L-L-I-S, paulanthonywallis.com. If you want to do coaching with me, that's the place to go. Go to my website and we'll get into a conversation.
Beautiful. Paul, I always appreciate our time together, brother. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on. And it really is my pleasure and privilege to include you in the next book, and give a shout out to what you're doing, Neil, because I absolutely love Portal to Ascension.
Thank you so much. Are you able to tell me what you wrote, or do I have to wait till the book comes out?
No, you'll have to read it. Have to read the book.
Okay, I'll do it. All right, man. Thank you so much, Paul. We'll talk later.
All the best.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care, brother. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, the replay will go out within a couple days. Appreciate every single one of you. Have a beautiful rest of your day, wherever you're on the planet. Speak later. Bye-bye.